Hello and welcome to the Business of Art. We're going to get started at the top of the hour in about 3 minutes, but I wanted to go ahead and open the room up. So if this is a great time, if you need to step away, grab some water, we'll get started shortly. Welcome to Temple SBDC's webinar on the business of art. You may notice as you're joining us that you have been joined in listen-only mode. That does not reflect any kind of disinterest in your participation. It's just to manage kind of the background noise that sometimes happens on these webinars when we have a lot of folks on. So as we go along, if you do have any questions for me, any comments, if you want to introduce yourself to other, creative entrepreneurs who might be in the Zoom room, I encourage you to use the chat feature. If it's been a minute since you've been on a Zoom call, I'm going to put something in the chat. So it'll pop up on your Zoom controls. So you should see a little notification pop up in the to show you where the chat box is. That's a great place if you want to introduce yourself, say hi, talk about the work that you do, or ask any questions. Feel free to. There's also a Q&A feature where you can share specific questions, which is great because then those questions pop up on the recording at the place where you're talking about them. So. My name is Isabel Chrome. I'm the Associate Director here at the Temple Small Business Development Center. It's a little bit about me if you're curious who's talking at you today. I am one of our business consultants. That's how I joined the center in 2021. I've also run my own business and have been the Associate Director here for about a year. And I've been working with small businesses for, at this point, I think 12 years. And I love working with my creative entrepreneurs. So I'm very happy to be talking today about the business of art. A couple more quick housekeeping items before we get into the subject matter of today. We are very proud at Temple University Small Business Development Center to be a nationally accredited provider of no-cost business consulting support and educational services. Our mission is to provide entrepreneurs and small business owners with the knowledge needed to make smart decisions and ultimately be successful. And we're very happy to be part of a statewide and nationwide network of centers just like us. Every zip code in the US is served by an SBDC. Our center serves Philadelphia and Montgomery County. We've been doing this since 1983, so not going anywhere. These stats that you see here reflect the success of our national network. And as you can see, we have a fair impact. So a little bit about our services, if this is your first time kind of connecting with us, we offer small business consulting. That's kind of the primary thing that we're known for. And that is work that, we meet one-on-one with entrepreneurs, either pre-venture, in business, any stage of business, to work on a variety of topics, like maybe business planning, thinking about expansion, marketing plans, strategic planning support, financial projection creation, access to capital, you need a business loan, things like that. You do a variety of work. The best way to access this service would be to go to our website, and there will be a QR code at the end here, but you can also find us at temple.edu/SBDC. And there's a request for consulting button you can find in the corner. Fill out that brief form and you'll get a welcome email inviting you to connect with one of our consultants. There'll also be a link for that in the follow-up email after today's webinar, along with the recording of the session and the slide deck that I use. And if you have any questions about our consulting services, or if you've reached out and you're waiting to hear back from somebody, we do occasionally get, emails stuck in spam. You can always feel free to reach out to sbdc@temple.edu. That's our main inbox with any question like that, and we'll connect you with the right, individual from our center from there. So again, we do small business one-on-one consulting. That's a core part of our services. We also have a number of other resources. We do a lot of kind of resource sharing. We hear about a grant program, we share it out to our audience on our newsletter and social media channels. We have a variety of training programs and webinars, including this one. Our events calendar is always being updated, so keep an eye there. If you're not signed up for our SBDC newsletter that we put out every month, a lot of great info in there. It's a good one. We have a great branding clinic for folks who might need, low cost branding support, like logo design and social media template creation and visual branding support like that. We also have a construction management certificate that runs 9 months of the year. It's one of the very few courses that support specifically entrepreneurs in the construction space. And it's a really fabulous program. It's been running for 30 years and it's wonderful. Not necessarily relevant to this audience, but you never know. And then, yeah, that's a little bit about us. We also have I think I talked about branding clinic. We do also offer a 12-week class for business owners that are thinking about scaling their business. You're in business, you're looking for that to take things to the next level. That has just started. And will run again in the fall. Keep an eye on our newsletter to find out more about that. Okay, that's enough intro stuff. Here is what we're doing today. So today we're going to talk about a question I get a lot from especially creative entrepreneurs. Am I in business? Do I have a side gig? How do I know? And how do I take what I've been building as a side gig and turn it into a business? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about first step essentials, which are all of the concerns around how do you formalize your business? How do you make sure that you have all your required licenses, that you've got a legal structure, all those things. We'll talk about the importance of a business plan, why it can help kind of ease that transition from hobby to business or side gig to business, and where else it might come in handy as your business grows. For those of you who are thinking about applying for the Creative Entrepreneur Accelerator grant, they're going to ask to see a business plan, and most grant funders will ask to see a business plan as well, as would any lender or landlord. Lots of other stakeholders like that. And it's just valuable for you. We'll talk about why and how to write one. We're also going to go through one of my favorite quick business planning tools. It's not quite a full formal business plan, but it gets you a lot of the way there. It's the business model canvas, and we'll use that to talk about the elements of a business concept. We'll also address some legal considerations, differences between different legal structures, risk management, things like that. And we'll close by talking about some tax considerations. So we're going to cover a lot of ground in an hour. If I'm speaking too quickly, if I'm moving through a topic that you want me to spend more time on, I would love you to share that feedback with me in the chat or in the Q&A. I can't promise I could make an hour into an hour and a half. I really can't, but I will be happy to take any questions or to try to slow down the speed of my presentation if that's what anybody needs. We will, as I said, share the recording for today as well. This session is really designed for folks that are in a creative business, and that's kind of the approach that we're taking throughout the program. If you're in a different industry and you want to talk a little bit more about some of these topics, I encourage you to check our events calendar and to consider coming to our First Step series, which is a 2-part webinar series that we run every single month that covers a lot of ground, including some of these things, but a lot more. And that's a great webinar. I think our next session is going to be April 7th and then April 14th. So check our calendar for those dates. The other thing to be aware of is, and I should have mentioned this on this slide, we have a YouTube channel where we put recordings from recent webinars going back, years and years. There's tons of info there available free, right from your home. Lots of good info there to check out about subject matter specific topics that you might not see in our calendar for the next month, but a QuickBooks class, digital marketing, managing employees, legal formation. Check our YouTube channel. There's lots there. All right, so let's get into it. And the first question is this big one. Do you have a side gig or do you have a business? And I've got, I'm, in my family proud to be raised by entrepreneurs and got a lot of business owners in my extended family, including some folks that are in more creative fields, and making that transition, knowing which kind of operation you're building is important. It changes your approach and changes your goals. So let's start by defining these terms. So we consider to be a side gig to be an activity that you enjoy doing. The primary goal of this activity is probably not to make money. It's probably to, be enjoyable in some way for you. You might charge your clients a nominal fee, but probably what you spend on this may exceed what you make on it, right? If you're if you're making art and you're spending more on your materials than you're charging your end customer, that's going to be hard to make real money on. I would consider that to be more of a side gig or even a hobby. You may or may not have a formal business entity. You're probably not setting up an LLC for this. You may or may not carry any kind of insurance. We'll talk a little bit later on about how insurance is valuable, and I hope as you leave today that you'll agree with me that insurance is a really valuable part of operating a business. Um, I'm hopeful, another goal of mine in today's webinar, I'm hopeful that those of you who came in thinking, well, maybe I have this side gig, will start to think of yourselves a little bit more as a business by the end. Because it's not about the time commitment that you make necessarily, it's more about the objective that you have and how you're operating. Side gigs generally also, in that same vein of being a little bit less formalized, your arrangements with your customers are probably not structured as written contracts. If you have any kind of agreement, it's verbal, it's a handshake. And we will definitely talk about why and how it's valuable to have those agreements be in writing. Towards the end, we're talking about legal considerations. You choose to start and stop your work as it fits into your schedule, as it fits into your lifestyle, rather than arranging the rest of your life around the obligations that come from the work that you're doing. You may or may not have any kind of long-term goals or vision for this, right? You might have creative goals, but you probably don't have, financial goals or other kinds of business goals for the work that you're doing. And you're probably not doing a lot of administrative work. You're probably not doing a lot of record keeping, social media marketing, strategic planning. You're just engaged in the creative work that you like doing, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, a side gig is a perfectly reasonable thing to be engaged in as a creative endeavor, but it's a little bit different than a business. So when you're operating a business, your goal is financial gain. Your goal is to make more than you are spending, to be profitable, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're exploitative, right? That doesn't mean that you're charging an unfair fee for your art or for your services. You're charging a market rate. You're charging something that feels fair, that aligns with other offerings that your customers might be thinking of or might be considering. You probably have a formal business entity, whether that's a fictitious name, an LLC, something like that, something that separates out the business and the personal. And we'll talk later on about why that's valuable, again, from a risk management perspective. You probably carry some kind of professional insurance. You probably, hopefully, have your agreements with your clients written down as contracts. And you're doing ongoing work to meet your clients' demands and meet your clients' needs to ensure that you can continue to grow your business. It is so much cheaper and easier to keep a client coming back than to go and find a new one. So making sure that you have open lines of communication with your customers and with your clients, and that you're taking opportunities to re-engage with those people to bring them back for additional services, additional purchases down the road. It's an important part of the work of operating a business. There's probably administrative work, be that bookkeeping, marketing, managing your operations, whatever those operations might look like for your business. But you're not just doing, the actual, you're not just creating art, you're also running administratively your operation. And ideally, you have clear goals. You know where you want to take the business, and you know what point you need to reach to meet your personal financial goals, your personal business goals. So that's kind of the difference between what we would consider to be a side gig or a business. Again, happy to take questions as you're going through. So how do you decide, now that we've talked about what these differences are, how do you know which one you are operating or even which one you might want to operate? My first suggestion is to make sure you're in communication with others in your field, that you know other people who are doing similar work as you are, and that you're connected with them. If you're thinking about taking a side gig or a hobby and turning it into a business, talk to people who are already operating that business. What's their life like? What challenges did they face as they were trying to build this? Have they quit, a day job? Is this their full-time source of income? And if so, How did they get there? What lessons do they have to share? You would be surprised by how collaborative and friendly most entrepreneurs are, especially in creative fields. So those relationships are really valuable. It's also so important to talk to prospective clients, not just to understand what they want so that you can meet their needs, meet their expectations, but also so that you understand um, how, so you get the practice about talking about what you do, about kind of selling yourself as a business, which is for a lot of folks one of the more challenging parts of this is how do I talk myself up if I'm not comfortable doing that? The best way is practice, really. Once you've done had some conversations and you've thought about what you want this to look like for you, you make that decision. If you want to operate a side gig, wonderful, enjoy, help others, advocate, support your artistic community, your small business community. But just go have a nice time with it, right? But if you want to take this more seriously and really operate as a business, I so encourage you to engage in a business planning process. And we'll talk today about what that can look like and how the SBDC can help. It's really also important that you be aware of any legal requirements, licenses, registrations, insurance needs, to make sure that you're operating in compliance with local laws, but also so that you're making sure that you're managing any risks that might exist in your industry. Do you need studio space? Do you need insurance? Right? What's normal in your industry, in your field, for a business? And we can help you understand some of those requirements as well. We also have a great starting your business checklist that you'll receive as part of the follow-up for this webinar. You want to review that to make sure that you've completed all steps that are required and recommended to formalize your business and to make sure that you're operating effectively. And we are pretty clear on that checklist about what's required legally and what's just our best recommendation. For instance, you don't legally have to have a website. It's a good idea though, right? That would be one of our best practices that we recommend. And our checklist talks about some of the timing of those steps as well. So let's get into that. So our first step essentials, these are basically all the things that you're going to be doing to take that activity that you're doing and formalize it, launch it as a business. We always want to recommend some kind of business planning process. And we'll talk why in a minute. Hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll agree with me that going through some kind of business planning process is a really valuable step for almost every entrepreneur, including creative entrepreneurs. And then we get into registering your business as a legal entity. This creates a separation between personal and business that is essential for managing the risks that are really inherent in operating a business. You want to make sure that you're keeping your personal finances and your business finances separate. And a legal entity is a really great it's a really great start for how to do that. And then of course, having a business bank account, which is also on this list a little bit later on. Often, a lot of local banks require you to have a legal structure before they'll open a business bank account for you, as opposed to a second personal account. Obtaining a federal employer identification number, or EIN or FEIN, all those different acronyms refer to the same thing, the employer ID number. This is a free to obtain number from the IRS. It essentially functions like a social security number for your business. If you've ever filled out a W-9 before, if you've ever been paid as a 1099 contractor, on that form, they ask you for your tax ID. If you don't have an EIN, you've got to use your individual social security number, which is an identity theft risk, right? So the more often you can be using a number that isn't your social, the better. Getting an FEIN is a clean and easy way to do that. It's a free filing, and we can help you with that paperwork if you need. You can reach out to us for that support. Then you're going to want to set up your tax accounts. So, if you sell tangible goods, products, you probably need a sales tax account. That's a state level tax account. There's also going to be tax accounts you want to create with your local municipality here in Philadelphia. That would include your BIRT, your business income and receipts tax account, as well as your net profits tax. If you have employees, there's also a payroll tax account that you would need to set up. On a state level, if you have employees, you're also looking at like a workers' comp tax account and others. If you're operating without employees, some of these might not apply to you. If you're unsure what does and doesn't apply on a state level, there's a recording on our YouTube channel from the Department of Revenue in Pennsylvania talking about tax requirements and registrations for new businesses. Here in Philadelphia, there's tons of info on the philadelphia.gov website about what's required for local businesses or those businesses that have a presence in Philadelphia, even if you're not headquartered here. And again, if you have questions about these, feel free to reach out to us individually. That's something we can absolutely support you with in a one-on-one consulting relationship. Once you've got those tax accounts set up, there are likely to be licenses and registrations that you need. There may not be any on a federal level, maybe not even on a state level, but if you are based in Philadelphia, there is a local business license that you would need called the commercial activity license. It used to be called the business privilege license. If you've been living in Philly for more than a decade, you might have heard it under that. Now it's called the commercial activity license. It is also free and pretty easy to obtain. You do have to have your Philadelphia tax accounts set up first, but it's pretty easy to get after that. Most applications go through within 5 or 10 minutes. You'll have your approved local business license. If you're outside of the city, you might want to contact your local municipality and see what's required there. It varies from township to township, municipality to municipality. Some require a business license only for businesses that are going to have like foot traffic, so not a home-based business. Others require anybody operating a business of any sort. So check with your local municipality. And then we get to business insurance. So business insurance is a really important part of risk management, and we'll talk about that under the risk management section. I've got a couple of examples to share with you. But really, even if it's not legally required for most businesses, but it's a real strongly recommended best practice for everybody. If you're thinking of leaving a W-2 job and you want to secure your own health insurance, that would be something to consider as well through the marketplace. And then we talked about opening a business bank account. We also suggest that you at least think about an accounting and legal team. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go out today and find a paid accountant and a paid attorney. I understand these are often expensive professional services providers out of the budget of an early stage, especially an early stage creative business. But you're going to need to keep records. You're going to need to think through, a boilerplate contract, for instance. If you're working or a client waiver or something like that, there's always going to be some kind of a written agreement and some kind of record keeping system. Whether you're working with a paid accountant and a paid attorney or DIYing it, have a plan. Here's how I'm going to keep my business records. I'm going to get a QuickBooks account or a Wave account or a FreshBooks account, and I'm going to keep my records that way. And I'm going to go to the pro bono legal clinic and make sure that my standard client agreement protects me appropriately. That's how I'm going to manage the financial and legal sides of my operation. Just have a plan, even if it's not a plan that involves paid services at this point. And then website, domain, and social media accounts. There is such a classic heartbreak that we deal with all the time here where somebody registers a legal entity with a business name that they love, but doesn't secure the domain name and the social media handle associated with it. And then you're stuck using, my last name is Chrome. Let's say I want to start a business, Chrome Consulting, but I didn't check to see if that URL is available. So now I'm stuck with Chrome Consulting PA or something, which is not ideal. When you go to register your business as a legal entity, even if you're not ready to launch those online platforms, secure the domain name, secure the social media handle, and sit on them until you are, because it's so nice when they can match up with the actual name that you're operating under. All right, now let's talk about business plans. So how many of you, by show of hands, you can raise your hands in the chat, have already worked on some kind of written business plan for your business? And if you need to know where to show your hands, you might need to check the, oh, I see some hand raised. Awesome. Okay, you can put it in the chat if you can't find the hand raise button. Awesome. Okay, great. So some of you will already know the value of this, but I'm going to talk briefly about it anyway. Why business planning matters. So these statistics are a little bit frightening, but it's true that within the first year, approximately 20% of businesses fail. If you look at the first 10 years, the failure rate for new businesses is closer to 70 to 80%. And our research has shown that 9 out of 10 business failures are caused by a lack of general business management skills and a lack of planning. Often there are obstacles that close a business that could have been foreseen and planned for, or there's a product that launched before there was a clear product market fit. You launch without knowing who you're going to sell to, things like that. That's behind a lot of these business failures. And a business plan can help. And I'm not saying that having a written business plan is a magical document. You will never hear me say, go ask ChatGPT to write your business plan. That's good enough. You're done. Because it's not true. It's actually not the document itself that makes a difference. It's the planning process that writing a business plan forces you to engage in. It's that practice of getting your ideas onto paper, working out your model, doing the research to understand what your customers want, what your competitors are charging, what the trends in your field are. Doing a basic feasibility analysis. Are there enough customers at the price point I need to charge to make my business financially feasible? Is there a profit potential here? Basically, you want to look at all the factors that could impact your business success, ask those tough questions, and wherever possible, make your mistakes on paper where it's cheap and easy to fix them. It is a lot harder to change how you're operating once you're up and running. If you can save yourself the heartbreak and get those kinks worked out in the planning stage, you're much more likely to be successful. I'm all about taking risks. It couldn't work with entrepreneurs without having a pretty healthy risk tolerance, but I love when the risks are measured risks, when I know what the odds are of success, and that business planning process is how you measure, as how you assess those odds. So that's my pitch for writing a business plan and doing a business planning process. And next, I'm going to show you a brief little business plan tool called the Business Model Canvas. Before we get into that, I always encourage people to think about any business idea that you have, whether it's, I want to open a pottery studio. I want to open a photography business. I want to launch a consulting firm, whatever it is. Think about the core engine of your business. If you are an engineer, forgive these gears. I know that they wouldn't actually turn the way that the arrows are showing. Bear with me. It's a graphic on PowerPoint. But these three core elements are really the engine of your business. If you change any one of these aspects, the others change as well. They drive each other. For instance, you probably walked in here with your unique value proposition, even if you didn't put those words on it. Your unique value proposition is the thing your customers are buying from you, the thing they're interested in buying from you. And that's shaped, that unique value proposition includes things like your price point, your service delivery method, your product or service itself, the differentiation, what sets your product or service apart from others like it. All that is baked into your unique value proposition. And of course, that has to be customized and built out to accommodate what a specific target customer wants. And it has to meet a specific customer need. So if you shift your focus, your target customer focus, that customer need is going to change. And so should the unique value proposition that will get that customer to actually buy from you. So any change in any of these three areas changes the others. There is a customer at every price point, but there are fewer customers at the upper ends, right? There is somebody who will buy a $5 candle and a $50 candle and a $500 candle, but there are way fewer at that higher end of the price point, and they're harder to find, and they have different expectations of what that candle needs to look like and do, right? And what the buying experience is, and what comes after it's bought, and all that stuff. And does the customer at the $5 price point. So that's the engine of your business, and those concepts apply to the business model canvas that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to let you read through these yourselves. We're going to go through each of these elements in detail as we work through a one-page business planning tool called the Business Model Canvas. I'm going to drop this file into the chat. And if your system, sometimes people's security setups don't allow you to accept the business model canvas, like to accept a file transfer over Zoom. So if you don't see a PDF just appear in your chat, that's probably because of some security setting that you have, but never fear. Open up your favorite search engine and type in business model canvas, and you will find a template you can download for free from the website Strategizer, which is the company that originated the planning tool. There's also templates in, I think, Google. Google Docs has a business model canvas template. Canva has a business model canvas template. They're all over. Here's what they look like. We're going to work through a hypothetical business to illustrate this planning process. And I've called that business ABC Wedding Photographer because I am not good at naming things. So, but here's the business model canvas. This all fits on one page, and that's helpful, especially for people who are more visual, because it helps you examine the relationships between all these different aspects of your business model canvas. I want to also note that most of these are internal aspects. There's nothing here for competition, for industry trends. As you expand this into a full plan, and I would encourage you to do so at some point, you'll need to include the competitive landscape, those external factors that affect your business model. But for now, for today, we're focusing just on the internal aspects. So as we go through the next few slides, we're going to have an empty section of the business model canvas with the guiding questions that should shape what goes there, followed by an example of the section completed for our wedding photography company that is hypothetical and doesn't really exist. So as we go through this, feel free to follow along and fill out your own, the canvas for your own business. Or if you prefer, feel free to just hang out. And oh, great, somebody was on a webinar with a BMC creator. That's awesome. It's a really powerful tool. You can map, anything from, home-based screen printing company to a Fortune 500 company on a business model canvas. You can map that operation. It's a really flexible tool. And if you have more than one idea that you're considering, or more than one way that you're considering working, do a couple of these as a first step before you launch into a more, full length formal plan. I always want to start as I'm going through the BMC with customers, because if you don't have a sense of who your customers are, you don't have a great, that's not a good sign for your business. You would need to know who you're selling to. And ideally, you want to think about the different kinds of customers that might be interested in what you're selling. What are those different kind of categories or segments of customers? I want you to also remember as you're going through this that your customer may not always be the end user that your service or product is designed for. As an example, let's say you're a music teacher. The way that you approach teaching music to fifth graders is going to be designed for kids, right? You're going to be your teaching method, the space where you teach, the kinds of music you choose, all of that stuff is going to be designed to meet the expectations and the needs of, a kid, right? But they're not the ones paying for your lessons. So as you're thinking about your marketing strategies, your website, your booking system, all of that has to meet the expectations of the customer, the parent, right? So there's a customer user distinction in that business model. And so, you might, if you're designing your marketing to appeal to the fourth grader, you might not reach the parent who's making the buying decision. So that distinction can be really helpful as you're thinking about marketing tactics and marketing messaging. Ideally, you want to, get as detailed as you can. The more detailed you are about your customer focus, the easier it is to find those customers and to think about marketing channels that are really going to be effective for them. So this could be things like location, geography, demographics, gender, age. It could be household income. It could be things like we call them psychographics or behavioral traits, like what people value. Is your ideal customer somebody who values, for instance, sustainability or, quality, local local artisanal design. What is it that they want? What makes them your ideal customer? It could also be lifestyle things. Somebody uh, has if you're offering a cleaning service, you might have a different marketing message for a two-income household than for a household with a stay-at-home parent. So think about all those different factors, and you want to ideally, as your next step in your business plan, try to quantify how many of these customers you actually have access to. This is a piece that I think people sometimes miss when you're thinking about your customers. It's not just who out there wants to buy what you're selling, but do you have a way to reach them? And then we'll talk about that. That's the marketing channel message. So here it is for ABC Wedding Photography. Their customer segments are aesthetic-driven couples. That's one, people who value the artistic quality of the photos. They feel that's a value that they can, provide. Convenience seekers, people who want to save time and reduce wedding planning stress by booking, a company that can do the photography and the photo booth and the videography. Reluctant documenters, people who hire out basic wedding day coverage and buy just enough services to satisfy family expectations. We're separating that out because we want to have different packages to meet those two different kinds of customers who are going to be buying very different kinds of services. And then local venues and vendors might be looking for promotional photography services. They might be looking for preferred vendors they can recommend to their couples. These are all different customer segments that the smart photography business is going to be considering. And they're going to have, different marketing channels, different marketing messages. So you can see why we're separating them out and doing segmentation. All right, next. So I'm going to move from customer segments to the value proposition. So this is at the core of your business model canvas. It's at the core of your business, right? In my opinion, this is, you can differentiate yourself in 5 basic ways: your pricing, your quality, your delivery method, your flexibility, and your service. You can't really compete on all 5 of those factors, right? You can't be the highest quality and the lowest price. The math doesn't really work. You can't be the highest, the most full service and the lowest price. You can't be the most flexible around and have the highest level of service. It's really challenging sometimes to balance those 2 things. So you're going to pick the 1 or the 2 factors of those 5 that you can really deliver on and focus on those. The others are not your priority. You want to meet expectations in them, but you cannot be all things to all people. You're not going to be best in class on price if you're also going to be best in class in one of these other factors. And all that can shape your unique value proposition. For ABC Wedding Photography, their value proposition. So again, this is what your customer is buying from you. What is it that they're coming to you for? For ABC Wedding Photography, it's quality wedding photography using professional equipment, edited to the stylistic preferences of the couple, convenient scheduling, reliable and fast gallery delivery, beautiful, timeless captured memories of their special day, right? You also might want to think about the value proposition to the venue, to those B2B customers, the venue and the wedding planners. What's the value prop to them? And notice that these are, these kind of align, these value propositions kind of align with the different customer segments that the business identified. And here they're competing on convenience, by having convenient scheduling and reliable, fast gallery delivery, as well as quality. Those are the 2 factors that this business has decided are the most important to their customers. And if you're not sure which of these factors matters the most to your customers, you can always ask them. Your customers have more answers than you might realize. Next, so now we've got 2 kind of disconnected pieces. They're connected by 2 different boxes. One is marketing channels. How are your customers you're trying to target going to learn about your value proposition? Through marketing channels. So you want to consider, how are customers currently buying what you sell? Where are they looking? Will you sell directly to customers or try to go 1 level up and sell to other businesses that'll sell to your customers? And that's where we find marketing channels. So the wedding photography business example, they are primarily direct to consumer D2C, selling wedding photography services directly to couples. They're open to B2B partnerships with venues and wedding planners, but that's secondary to their core service of photography services. And they rely on channels like wedding vendor platforms, social media advertising, word of mouth, and vendor referrals. Those are the four channels they're reliant on. As the business is operational for longer, they might evaluate the success of each of those four different channels and consider where to spend time, where to focus their marketing efforts. It's going to be on those channels that are giving you the best conversion rate, the lowest cost of customer acquisition, the most bang for the buck, basically. Now, as I've said, keeping an existing customer is so much cheaper than finding a new one. So how are you going to maintain those relationships with customers once you've gotten them? And for a wedding business, it's kind of tough, right? That's kind of a thing you're supposed to only do the one time. So how do you keep them coming back? Well, client referral programs. How can you convince your existing customers to become an ambassador for you and to refer people to you? Maybe there's an anniversary photo shoot offer that you send out automatically at 9 months out from or 10 months out from the ceremony to your previous customers. Just an example, right? So in your business, maybe you have an opportunity for more kind of recurring sales with existing customers. How are you keeping them interested? How are you keeping them aware of what you're doing? Do you have a newsletter? Do you reach out from time to time using drip marketing? Do you send a follow-up message after a sale to say, hey, it's been a week or two. Hope you're enjoying your new mug that you bought from my pottery studio? How are you connecting with those existing customers and keeping them aware of what you're selling? So all of this is on the right-hand side of the business model canvas, and all of this is going to drive revenue and sales. But sales are just one half of the equation here. What's driving costs? So on the left-hand side, key activities. What are the things that your business does, the tasks that you do in your business that create that value for your customers? And what are the other key activities that your business engages in that might not be directly revenue generating, but they're important in for other reasons? For instance, still got a Joe's Coffee Shop up top. This should say ABC Wedding Photography. Apologies there. So ABC Wedding Photography provides quality wedding photography and editing services. That takes up the majority of that business owner's time. But they're also maintaining relationships with wedding vendors and community groups. That's another important activity that the business owner engages in, or that the business has to do, that might not be, part of the core part of those core functions. But if you let those activities go, very soon you'll run out of customers. If you had more room, and again, I am terrible, I wrote a little bit more words than here than I should have, but you might also separate out, the initial customer meetings, check in before the ceremony, day of photography services, editing, putting together galleries, offering to sell prints, sending invoices, dealing and kind of separating out those tasks a little bit more explicitly might help as you're thinking about managing operations. Now, next up after activities, we're looking at resources, one box down. These are the internal assets or resources that your business relies on. And these could be raw materials, it could be people, equipment, software, buildings, basically anything that your business owns or pays internally that you rely on. So for instance, ABC Wedding Photography relies on equipment, cameras, lenses, and lighting equipment, computers and photo editing software, a studio space perhaps, or reliable transportation to get to the wedding venues, and a scheduling and invoicing system. Important internal resources to this business operations. Next up, key partners. What external partnerships does your business rely on for anything, for new customers, for anything? So this could be referral partners, key vendors, professional or local associations, and others. And key partnerships are two-way streets. What value does your business get from these partnerships, and what do these partners value about you, right? So sometimes it's a very clear value calculation. For instance, the online platform, there's a cost per referral, right? That's a very clear, each of us are getting something out of this. And ditto with the vendors, the printing lab and the camera equipment suppliers, right? I pay you, you sell me a camera, everybody's happy. You were paid and I have a camera. But there's also less monetary partnerships, like maybe a relationship with a venue, or with another kind of photographer, or a relationship with another service provider that's going after the same kind of customer. You'll find, if you're in the wedding space, that some of your best sources of business are going to be other services focus on weddings: the florist, the caterer, the bridal boutique, the makeup artist. And those referral relationships should be two-way streets, right? You have people that you like to work with, that you're going to recommend to your customers that find you, that are maybe looking for those same services, and hopefully vice versa for those referral partners. An accountant, an attorney, and SBDC advisor can also be important partners for your business. I'm going to move on, but again, happy to take any questions here. And see, I'm not quite sure I understand your question there, but I'd love to address it. I'm just not quite sure. I see local customers' interest is different from other states. How to identify? Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that question, and I'll come back to it. So here's the business model canvas so far. We're doing great on time, but notice that these are all kind of connected sections, right? Your activities are driving value proposition, and so are the resources. And your value proposition is connected to your customer segments through customer relationships with existing customers and channels for new customers. Now we've got revenue and cost structure that's blank, so we're going to talk about those very next. Revenue streams. How is your business making money, right? Have you considered all the different ways you could monetize your operations? So for a wedding photographer, that's photography services, engagement session services, sales of prints, physical albums, and other photography products, B2B sales, photo booth and equipment rentals. These are all the ways that this company is generating revenue. And then there's costs. What expenses will your business have? Include, overhead expenses like rent, utilities, as well as direct costs like materials and labor. And you might want to separate out those startup costs that you're going to only spend like the once from your ongoing expenses that you're going to have every single month or every single year. So for ABC Wedding Photography, startup costs include this equipment, maybe a lease deposit for a studio space, beginning inventory, things like your memory cards, your hard drives, etc. And then fixed costs that recur every month, whether you're having a great month or a slow month: rent, insurance, staffing, advertising, professional services, and then variable costs that might not be the same every month, but that vary depending on how much actual work you're doing in your business. So travel, prints and physical materials, equipment maintenance. The more I use the camera, the more I might spend taking care of it, all that good stuff. Here's the completed canvas. You'll get this, as I said, in the follow-up email, so don't kind of zoom in and hurt your eyes reading it, but we're going to switch gears now and talk about legal considerations. There are a few things we're going to talk about here. The first is corporate structures or legal structures. I want to be super clear that I'm not an attorney and I'm not a tax professional, and the decision of how to structure your business has both legal and tax implications. But some basics: sole proprietorship is the default. If you don't have a separate legal entity formed, but you are charging money for services or products, you are a sole proprietorship, meaning that there is no difference in the eyes of the IRS between you and your business. They're one and the same. There's one owner, it's you. You file your taxes on their personal return as a Schedule C. You can use a fictitious name, a name that isn't yours, but you have to register that name with the state. And it can be challenging to open a business bank account as a sole prop. And you're a little bit less professional looking than like an LLC or a corporation. But as long as you carry appropriate insurance coverage and you're keeping your personal and business money separate, and you are in a relatively low risk industry, it's a viable option. If you're thinking about scaling, hiring employees, if you want to keep, have a slightly more professional kind of brand, consider an LLC or a corporation. The main difference between an LLC and a corporation is how you pay yourself. As a corporation, you have to be paid a salary, whereas as an LLC, you can take an owner's draw that can vary significantly based on how the business is doing. So if you're unsure what kind of income your business is going to generate, what kind of salary or paycheck you're able to pay yourself, an LLC can make sense at the start. And you can read more about this. There's a really great resource on legal structure on the University of Pennsylvania Legal Clinic, and I will try to find that link and send it in the follow-up email. But there's other legal considerations as well. Intellectual property is a big one. If you're creating art that you need to protect in some way with a copyright, or if you have a logo that you want to use and you want to trademark it, make sure that you're protecting those intellectual property assets in your business appropriately. There's a great resource at the Business Resource and Innovation Center in the free library that can help you think about the appropriate intellectual property protection for you. You can also check out our website. We just ran a trademarks webinar yesterday. That recording should be up soon. And there's going to be a really great one. I think yesterday was Intellectual Property 101. Check that out on our YouTube channel. It should be posted within a week or two. Other legal issues to consider: if you have employees, you may want to have an employee manual. Think about, how to appropriately ensure that they're trained up and providing the quality of services that you want them to provide. If you might also use a contract in relationships with your customers or with contractors that you work with directly, or with, important vendors. I'm a big believer in a written agreement, whether it's as informal as an email saying, "Hey, it was great talking to you earlier. Here's what we agreed to do," or as formal as a written contract. And you can find really great boilerplate contracts online. You don't have to necessarily pay an attorney to draft one. But if it's, it's not a bad idea, if you're going to be somebody who works a lot in a B2B space, to have a standard contract that you work with an attorney to draft that you can use over and over again. Risk management. How to find specific programs. Okay, we'll talk about, so see, I'm going to come back to that question, I promise. We talked about risk management. Let's talk about risk management. So think about risk management as a three-legged stool. We manage risks in three main ways. Business entity, creating that separation between the business and the personal. Contracts, making sure that there's a written agreement in place with any key customer or key vendor. And insurance. So for instance, let's say you teach children's crafts at a local daycare. You can manage the risk of being sued for injuring a child by using a written contract with the host daycare that outlines everybody's responsibilities for managing the kids. You can carry appropriate insurance. You can maintain clear separation of personal and business assets through a legal entity, so that if you do get sued and you get found, liable for damages, they only come out of your business assets, not like your home equity, your personal bank account. You can have parents sign a waiver. There's that contract again. And of course, you can also manage this operationally by choosing crafts that are age appropriate and unlikely to result in injury, right? And that would be a kind of a fourth leg of that stool. But if you're only managing risks in two ways or not through all three, it's a pretty wobbly stool, right? Question in the chat: the business model canvas will be emailed. You can also find it online. It's a very popular planning tool, and there's a free download from the originator of the framework, Strategizer. So if you Google business model canvas, you'll find it online. So that's just an example of why risk management is important and how these different aspects of risk management make a difference. Let's say you are our wedding photographer business might manage the risk of let's say on a wedding day, your expensive camera is damaged. Somebody spills wine on your camera. Well, professional liability insurance could protect against claims from the client for, you didn't finish photographing my wedding because your camera got broken, and that's breach of contract. Well, I couldn't. Professional liability coverage can help you navigate that legal aspect. You might have equipment insurance that can cover repair or replacement of cameras. And a written contract might help outline those, what to do in that kind of a case. A contract turns that verbal agreement into something that's more enforceable, that has clear expectations, protecting both the wedding photographer and the bride and groom. And then having that LLC, that legal entity, without a legal entity, if that client sues the wedding photographer, personal assets like home and savings accounts could be at risk. So 3 legs to that stool, right? We have about 5 minutes left, maybe 6 minutes left. We're going to talk now about tax considerations. Best type of insurance protects clients' property. I would consider professional liability coverage for that. would be my recommendation. But you also, with insurance, I always recommend talking to more than one insurance provider and getting a quote from more than one provider, because just like with home insurance or car insurance, the kind of coverage and the amount of coverage can vary across different quotes. And different insurance providers might have a different assessment of what kind of protection is most appropriate for you. Get a couple of quotes, compare them, not just on the price, but also on the amount and kind of coverage. But then I would also be thinking about managing that risk with a waiver or a client agreement. And then, of course, operationally, you'll be as careful as you can when you're framing clients' artwork, right? So all those three legs to that stool. So tax considerations. This is one thing that I think a lot of, especially a lot of early stage entrepreneurs overlook. And it's so classic of an experience when you're starting out, to spend, to get that nasty surprise on tax day. Tax day is coming up, and I don't want anybody to get that kind of a surprise. Anybody who's operating any kind of business, collecting revenue, in exchange for services or products, you have to report your income, regardless of how those payments were made. If they were cash, if they were online, if they were Venmo, if they were PayPal, you got to report all income. You're going to report it as self-employment income, generally speaking, which means that you're going to have self-employment taxes. You're going to also be paying both the employer and the employee side of your Medicare and Social Security. Nobody loves paying taxes, but if you're keeping good records, and you're keeping records, especially of your business expenses, you can reduce your total taxable income, because the taxable income is your net profit, which is your income, everything that you've made in sales minus your expenses. So keep good track of both the income and the expenses. That record keeping makes a big difference at tax time. And it also can make a difference in the amount that you pay your tax preparer. If you show up with a shoebox full of receipts, you're going to spend a lot more time preparing your taxes than if you show up with a well-maintained bookkeeping system that's just, okay, I'll just pull some numbers, plug them in, boom, 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 taxes completed, right? You want to document everything you spend related to that business or side gig. All business-related transactions should come through ideally one bank account or one bank account and a business card. And you can even link those to your bookkeeping system so that transactions are inputted automatically, saves you time. You could also use a basic spreadsheet with income and expenses. It takes a little bit more time, it's less expensive. Like with most things that decisions that you make as a business owner, if you have more time, you might go with a basic spreadsheet. If you have more money, you might pay for a bookkeeping service or a bookkeeping platform. And as your business grows, that calculation might change, and so might the way that you maintain your business records. But the fact that you maintain records is essential regardless of the scale of your business. If you're a side gig, if you are generating income from a business, keep those records. All right. Other taxes to be aware of besides just your federal taxes. Probably if you're based in the city of Philadelphia, you're going to have business income and receipts taxes. You might have net profits taxes as well. So be aware of those filing deadlines. Wherever possible, and again, I'm not a CPA, you can estimate and prepay your income taxes on a quarterly basis, and this can save you penalties at the end of the year. When you're a W-2 employee, your taxes are withheld for you and prepaid throughout the year, and then you file your return. Maybe you get a refund, maybe you owe a little bit, but the majority of your taxes were already paid. When you are self-employed, this is not the case. That's where we end up with those surprise massive tax bills. But you can fix that by estimating your taxes throughout the year and prepaying them so that that 30% or whatever it is that you're putting aside is just automatically taken out of your bank account once a quarter throughout the year, and then at tax time you're not going to find that and figure that all out. Great question. Can you have an expense prior to setting up a business? Yes, you can. Absolutely. But talk to an accountant or do some careful research on how best to record that, whether it's a deductible business expense or not. So yeah, spreadsheets or a bookkeeping platform, either way, keep good records. These are some of the basics. If you might have sales tax, general rule, products are taxable, services are not. That's a rule of thumb, but you can check the retailer's guide in Pennsylvania for details on what is and isn't taxable. Digital products are also products. So if you're selling, a gallery of photos online, that's a digital product and that's subject to sales tax. Be aware that with sales tax, you're going to have probably quarterly reporting regardless of whether or not you had any sales. Once you have a sales tax license, you're expected to file those regular reports, even if you didn't have any sales in that reporting period. And if you fail to file them, you will get you'll get some calls from the Department of Revenue. So bear that in mind as you're planning your business. There may be other taxes that apply to you. Do some research. Philadelphia has a sugary beverage tax, there's a hotel occupancy tax, there's short-term rental tax. There may be others that apply to your business. Tax preparation, if possible, work with a tax professional for your tax return preparation. It's almost always worth it to spend the money to have a tax professional do this, both for peace of mind, that auditing support if you do get audited, but also because they're likely to find those deductions that are going to save you money over time. Make sure that you're set up properly, that you're aware of relevant tax deadlines. All this is super important. Ideally, find a referral from within your industry, but keep good documentation so that you're ready when you meet that tax professional. Next steps. Find an SBDC. You can find us online here. If you're not located in our area and you want to find your local SBDC, there's a link there to the americassbdc.org. Find your SBDC tool. Check out the SBA Learning Center, and don't forget to connect with us. You can find us online at temple.edu/SBDC on various social media platforms. Sign up for our newsletter with that QR code. And before you leave, if you wouldn't mind, let us know how we did. Complete the survey that's linked in the chat. It's 3 or 4 questions, takes no time at all. It really helps us understand how we're doing and keep us improving for future presentations. It's been a pleasure to speak with you all today. It is 1 o'clock. I'm happy to take a couple questions, but I do have to run for another meeting. I'm sure you all have places to be as well, but I'll take 1 or 2 questions before we break. Concerning key activities ratio guides. So it really depends on the kind of business you're running. You want to keep as much of your time as possible spent on activities that generate revenue for you. So you want to be spending as little time as possible on marketing, accounting, and administrative tasks that aren't necessarily revenue generating, but you can't ignore them. So they have to get done somehow. That time split is a really good question, and it comes up. It's something we actually talk a lot about with our existing businesses. I will absolutely I'd be happy to address that with you in a one-on-one session. Recording for this session will be shared in the link, or in the link to the recording for this session will be shared in the follow-up email, Michael. And then the main differences between corporation and LLC. The major one is the number of owners. LLCs can have multiple members. Corporation can have, hundreds, right? Also, LLCs pay their owners as an owner's draw, which can vary a lot depending on how the business is doing. Corporations pay their owners as either shareholder distributions, once a year or so, or as a salary. So often it doesn't make sense to form a corporation until you're at the point where you can pay yourself a regular salary. There's more as well, but there's lots of reading out there about the difference. Those are just kind of the more practical ones that come up to us. How do you calculate rent as an expense working from home? It depends on how much of your home is dedicated to business purposes. There's, if you have a, 1,200 square foot residence, and your studio takes up 400 square feet of it, that's a third, right? So a third of your rent would be considered a business expense. So I hope that helps. I'm unfortunately going to have to stop taking questions because I've got to run to another meeting, but I am dropping my email address in the chat if anybody wants to follow up. And keep an eye on your inbox when the email comes through. There'll be a link to schedule an intro session with one of our consultants. I encourage you to take advantage of our one-on-one consulting services. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your Thursday and a great rest of your week. Thanks for joining us today. It was a pleasure.